Good evening. You're watching Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are going to discuss the issues of the day. We're going to start with the final primaries. These are the last of the primaries before the election. There were no special elections or anything, but there were some very interesting results. They took place in three states: New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Delaware. No surprises in either place. President Biden made a surprise visit to vote in person in Delaware. A couple of other notes about New Hampshire, but Senator Hassan, who's facing the re-election and probably would have lost if Sununu stayed in the race, was out of Washington and in New Hampshire to be there. And the problem was between her and one other senator, I'm forgetting, a judge didn't get appointed. So they're going to have to bring back the circuit judge because the Republicans, even though they don't really object to her, just wanted to slow it up by voting 50 against, and only 48 senators voted yes. Chuck Schumer voted no just to preserve the right to bring the judge back. But this is what politics is like at this time, is the Republicans saw an opportunity to slow down a judge potentially until they retake the Senate. If they retake the Senate, that is, of course, a huge if, as we've been discussing on the show. And then, in fact, I believe at the latest, 538 has it 70-30, and they're no longer saying the Democrats have a slight chance of winning, but are favored outright. So we'll talk about that, but let's talk about the primaries. There were no real big news in New Hampshire or no big news in Rhode Island or Delaware. Everything pretty much went according to predictions, but New Hampshire, maybe went according to predictions, but some very interesting results. And Dave, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can pick that up. So I think framing it is interesting too, because people don't necessarily pay that close of attention to New Hampshire, but in reality, you mentioned how the Democrats are looking like 7-3 or 70-30 that they'll be able to control the Senate. But if you look at it from the other perspective, the Republicans are looking to just take 2 seats away from Democrats, and then they get their own version of dominating and controlling the Senate. So with their top targets being Georgia, which we talked about, Arizona, Nevada, but also New Hampshire. So that's what I think. But New Hampshire is kind of a weird state because all 4 members of their congressional delegation are Democrats, but their state government is controlled by Republicans. So even their governor is a Republican. But we are targeting right now. We're focusing on the Senate race because that's really the critical one. And so Senator Maggie Hassan, the incumbent, she is considered vulnerable. And so recent polling in New Hampshire showed that, over 60% of the people said they're ready to replace her. But where that, rubber meets the road here is that the person who won is he's considered one of those Trump-backed candidates that has a lot of fringe views, we'll say. So that is retired Army General Don Bolduc. And so even though Republicans have a great climate there for possibly unseating Senator Hassan, Bolduc in some estimates is like a 5-1 underdog. In fact, even like Corey Lewandowski, former Trump campaign manager, he urged Trump not to endorse him. And in fact, I don't think Trump actually ever did end up endorsing him. So it really is just him being out there on his own with some of these fringe opinions. Just for context, it's one of those situations where we expect that Hassan will be able to hold on despite that bad climate.
Yes, and we will be later in the show discussing the strategy that Democrats have employed of supporting, not the Democrats, certain Democratic groups in supporting these candidates, and whether or not that's playing with fire. But Mr. Bolduc, General Bolduc, is one of those candidates. He's an election denier to the core. You know that if he loses this, he's going to be screaming fraud, even though he's probably going to get buried by about 10-15 points at this point. But this is what they're electing. On the other, as far as the governor's concerned, Sununu won hands down. There was an election denier who ran against him that got about 11% of the vote. So, and as you pointed out, New Hampshire is probably the most conservative of the northeastern of the New England states. It has gone Republican a few times. For instance, it went to George Bush over Al Gore in 2000. Had Al Gore managed to just hold that state, and it was really close, he would have been president. 4 years later, even though John Kerry lost to Bush at that time, Kerry did take New Hampshire, and the Democrats usually take it. You usually have a slight advantage, but as you know, that it's as you commented, there's enough Republicans that they control the state. But these are New England Republicans, log cabin club types. These are not. Most of them are not of the Trump, Southern Baptist evangelical framework. These are old style type of people who would have supported, for instance, Justice Souter, who was, came from that place, who was a liberal judge, certainly by national standards. So, again, this is news. And yes, Hassan will probably win it, but she was seen as vulnerable because she's kind of lackluster. And if Sununu had decided to run for the Senate, the Republicans would have had it, but he didn't want to do it because he doesn't want to be part of the national Republican strategy of just doing nothing and just being in it for power. He doesn't go along with the McConnell program.
And it's interesting. You and I think we've talked about this in the past, but Governor Sununu, he comes from a long line of moderate, or at least a second generation moderate Republican. His father, I think, was in the Reagan administration, if I remember correctly. So he's very popular, 3-term governor. And when he was commenting on General Bolduc, what he said was that he's a conspiracy theorist type candidate.
Yes.
And so that shows you a little bit of the split between what we call mainstream Republicans there. But it was a really close race. The Senate president in New Hampshire was the candidate running in the primary against General Bolduc, and it was like 37 to 36%.
Very close.
Just a few thousand. Yeah, exactly. So don't ever think that your vote doesn't count, because this is, this in that state, it's really coming down to less than 1%. One thing, just, I don't want to say that he's this type of person without giving some examples. And these are examples. I believe I got this from the New York Times, but he'd said he called in return for being called the conspiracy theory type candidate. General Bolduc called Governor Sununu a Chinese communist sympathizer. Mm-hmm. And he said that the 17th Amendment allowing for the direct popular election of senators should be repealed. I guess he doesn't believe that everybody should vote for Senate.
So why is he running?
He also raised the possibility of abolishing the FBI. And, and when asked about the election, he said, quote, "I signed a letter with 120 other generals and admirals saying that Donald Trump won the election, and damn it, I stand by it." He said that in a debate.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Senator Morse was a classic New England moderate Republican. He's pro-choice, moderate on social issues, even left by some degrees. Not homophobic, not all of these aspects. And if he'd won, it would have been Hassan was still given the edge in winning that, but just because the polls had her over this guy. But the Republicans aren't going to vote for him. Sununu will probably just stay quiet. He's certainly not going to endorse Bolduc, right? And he'll probably, he won't endorse her, but he'll probably just stay silent. And that people take notice, that kind of notice in New Hampshire. It's but he's going to be screaming fraud, just like anytime the election denier candidates do. Sometimes they even do it when they win. So I mean, it's just like, for instance, in Ohio, there's all kinds of public records requests wanting to show that Trump should have won by even a bigger margin because of all the fraud, and and you talk to people that are in that camp, and they just will believe it until the end. And this is probably one of several reasons why the Republicans are facing a tough Senate Lukosha, is they have picked extremists or people willing to pander to extremists. For instance, I don't think Oz really is an extremist, but he's pandering to that crowd in Pennsylvania. Just as Ron Johnson has done, and he's sorry he did it now. He was out on, but he's probably going to lose in Wisconsin because he hitched himself to the Trump train when most of the other senators in purple states like Wisconsin knew better. He seemed to think he was, running in Oklahoma or something. He got it, lost track of himself. Well, here you have it in New Hampshire. So I wanted to then move from that into the primaries are done. We know whose candidates are, where they are. 538 has, as I mentioned, 70-3. It's been as high as 72-28. The betting odds have the Democrats. I mean, pretty much and Republicans themselves are conceding that they've had to walk that back, a little bit because candidates matter at that level, because it's not as polarized as one way or another with gerrymandering in the House district races. That's one of the reasons it's so different. Where are we with the Senate or in general and the election? We've been talking about it every week, but what are your thoughts?
Well, so you're talking about the Senate, but we are. I mean, I think generally, one of the things I would like to point out now too is that the House is 72-28 in favor of Republicans, according to 538. Right. That's with 40,000 possible outcomes. And I'll address your question about Senate first, but I just think it's
remember
important.
When it started, it was 88-12. So there's been a lot of movement there too.
Yeah, which is really what we've seen as the economy gets a little bit better and as President Biden gets a little more forceful in sort of defending his record of accomplishments. But I just think sort of big picture, 30,000-foot view, who will win Congress? This changes over time. But so the chances for the Republicans to win the Senate and the Democrats to win the House, which both are the two low probability events, it's less than 1%. So they're saying that it's not going to go that way. The flip side of that is what if it stays? What are the chances that it stays with the odds that the Republicans take the House and the Democrats take the Senate? That one is 43 out of 100 right now currently. So that's by far the most likely outcome. But for Republicans to sort of come out ahead in both is 28%, and for the Democrats to come out ahead in both is 28%. So ironically, they're both depending. It's about a 1 in 3, a little bit, a little bit more than 1 in 2. But so the strong likelihood then is that it ends up being Democrats win the Senate and Republicans win the House as of now. But it's a moving target.
But there's things that we don't know so far. In all of the special elections, the Democrats have overperformed in all of the polls, every single one since the Dobbs decision. So there's definitely a factor there. Does it mean 2 points? Does it mean 5 points? We don't know. But the problem for the Democrats is there are probably about 30-ish, maybe 40, but arguably about 30 competitive districts where it's kind of a toss-up as to who can win. Well, you've got four. The Democrats have a 4-person lead, but I believe I take that back. It's 30 Democratic races that are tossed up, and I think like 10 for a net of 20. I'm forgetting the exact numbers, but basically, if you were to flip a coin for every race, obviously the Republicans would win half and the Democrats would win half. Well, that would result in about a 14 or 15 point increase for the Republicans if you flip coins. So Democrats can't just even rely on it being an equal election, an even election in these districts, because most of the districts that are competitive are currently Democrats, and so I think the differential is about 15. We talked about it on our previous show. So it's tough for them to hold on to, but again, we don't know the extent of the Dobbs effect. And there is clearly a Dobbs effect. The Republicans caught a little bit of a break with the inflation report yesterday, and they may catch a big break if this train strike happens, because that could just kill the economy. With just inflation will go off the rails. So the Democrats are going to have to do something about that, and I'll let you close out commenting on it.
Yeah. So I mean, we are talking. I think we'll just do these last couple minutes just addressing an issue like the train strike, which wasn't really on anyone's radar that recently, but now it turns out that conflict, that labor issue is coming to a head as soon as Friday, just a couple days down the road from now. And obviously, like you said, it's going to get on the radar of folks. More so if there's an impasse and there is an actual strike, because coal, for example, and so many other agricultural inputs, chlorine that goes into water treatment plants. Yeah. If all those things are shipped by rail. So if energy is impacted or water is impacted in a way, it could really hurt our way, harm our way of life directly. It usually labor
and
like
farm goods too. There's some farmers that have to use that, and food is already through the roof. So
yep. And all I was saying is that usually labor issues are indirectly affecting us, but this one is a real pressure point, and it'll force people to take a look at what's actually at stake. I mean, maybe people will pay attention and say, oh, they're looking for the labor strike is about some flexibility and scheduling time off. They're not asking for a whole lot, to be honest. And so, all things being equal, it could end up being a benefit to Democrats if the railroad does not cave into this demand, because it does seem like it just seems like bullying to a certain extent of people's lifestyle. So we'll see as this issue evolves, and maybe other ones are going to keep popping up between now and November.
Yeah, we're talking about 13 unions, so this is going to be tricky. But anyway, all right, well, we'll be talking about that. And if there's a strike, we'll be talking about it again. If not, we probably won't bother. So we'll see.
Meet Bob Burns.
In TV ads like this one, an unexpected and risky strategy.
And I'm an America First candidate.
Burns follows the Trump playbook on immigration, the border, and guns.
What at first glance looks like a typical campaign message for a Republican primary candidate is actually an ad paid for by Democrats.
Democrat serve is responsible for the content of this ad.
Democrats boosting his candidacy are essentially rolling the dice.
An agenda too conservative for Illinois.
It's part of a national strategy.
Donald Trump's hand-picked candidate for Maryland governor. Cox worked with Trump, trying to prove the last election was a fraud.
Handpicked by Trump to run for Congress, Gibbs called Trump the greatest president.
Republican Chris Matisse, a true conservative, 100% pro-Trump.
Okay, we want to talk about going back to General Bulldog. He had several commercials that were paid for by Democratic, what they're calling outsider groups. This is not the Democratic National Committee, and none of the candidates are supporting this, like none. But the theory is, and this has been happened before, is that if they can get in a Trumper, election denier, so-called crazy person in as the Republican candidate, then the Democrats will have a much better chance of winning those races. New Hampshire is one of those states where they're doing it. They have backed the gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania, who's about as crazy, and other candidates around the country. And Republicans are criticizing the Democrats because they're it makes them look kind of hypocritical if this was all the Democrats. Because they're saying, Trump and his supporters are a proto-fascist danger. Biden made that speech and everything, and yet they're willing to play with fire here. And just real quickly, I'll turn it over to you, but there's several problems with this. And I actually think this is very bad. And I do think that the Democratic Party leadership should be telling those groups, this is not welcome. Please don't do this. Because first of all, you assume they're not going to win, but then everybody thought that Trump wasn't going to win. There were people who were glad when Trump won the nomination and saying, Hillary Clinton's a shoo-in now, right? Well, famous last words.
Right.
The other point is that even if they don't win, they are now made, their presence in the popular politics is now known. They've been elevated, and they may run for Congress or even just school board, and or things like that. So to elevate them to allow them to win the primary is a mistake, because they're going to have influence elsewhere, even if they lose this election. So not only does it make the Democrats look hypocritical, but they're playing with fire. And there are a couple other concerns with that too. And I really do think that, it's too late now because the primaries are all over, but the Democratic leadership should have gotten on the phone with these groups that were doing this and said, stop it. Who knows if they even had that much of an effect? I don't know that ads have that much effect, but the fact of the matter is we've got these crazy candidates and some of them could win.
Right. Yeah. So what I think is most interesting about this is that almost like in a proper debate, you can see it from both sides. You can understand the arguments from both sides. There's the sort of absolutist opinion that says it's about winning. And if you do game theory and you play out the logic, when you have a moderately popular, moderate Democrat against a very small, popular Trump-like Republican with a third of the base really agitated, but no crossover appeal, that is probably an easier candidate to run against. So in just pure game theory terms, I understand where they're coming from. But they spent over $50 million. That, according to the Washington Post, that number is closer to $55 million. And it's not just outside groups, air quotes. It's also people affiliated with prominent sitting Democratic people. Like Schumer has an affiliated PAC, not his leadership PAC, not the like all the Senate leaders. They have these leadership PACs, and so they're channeling money directly from their current position or their first degree friends or their third and fourth degree friends, depending how many layers out you go in these how outside they are. But this is a 1 degree. This is $3+ million that went into to the Pennsylvania race, I think.
And I guess the implication is that much money wouldn't have been spent without at least some tacit approval. From the mainstream, where publicly they'll say, no, you shouldn't be doing that. No, that makes blah blah blah. But privately, it's going to make it so that we can win these. I think it's myopic even in that context. But go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. So honestly, that was my first position. Is this is the game theory. This is the people that are saying this is why we're doing it. Win at all costs. We've got money. Let's target these people. Let's elevate the people that are going to alienate voters the most. That was the argument. And so the question is, now the flip side of that is what you had said, which is what you're doing. You are normalizing this language. You are amplifying it, and you're sort of reinforcing people who may only tenuously believe that some of these candidates are viable or desirable, but almost to a certain extent, it is that common that familiarity that allows people to go into the polling booth and possibly, if you're a lifelong Republican and you've heard this person's name over and over and over and over again in the last few months, then you say, well, he's one of us. He's not team blue. He's not team Biden. He's not team Democrat. So it normalizes them, which I think, like you said, I think that there's that argument to be made for being myopic. And so now the question is where the rubber hits the road. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 months, but according to what we're seeing in the Senate, potentially in the Senate polling, for example, it may in fact be working, because the midterm cycle, like we've talked about in the past, really does work against the sitting president and his party almost every year, almost every cycle, off cycle, and to a big extent, nearly 9% swing, and in a House of 435 people, that's a big swing. So that's the norm. The norm is that there's going to be a big swing against President Biden and his party. But it's really close in most cases in the Senate, at least in the Senate side, because of these candidates. Many of these candidates, like we talked about, Herschel Walker in Georgia and Mastrano in Pennsylvania, and this General Bullock in New Hampshire and in Ohio. JD, what's his name? The author.
JD Vance.
J.D. Vance in Ohio.
Yeah.
Like these
Although
are
he's not crazy, but he's
playing one on
Cambridge.
TV. Yeah, he's playing one on
Cambridge,
TV.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not going to judge him, but I think he's fitting that mold of where he's taking a line, he's playing, he's taking a position and a strategy that plays into what the Democrat outside group funding was intending, which is moving the needle to make some of these races that should not be competitive very competitive.
Yeah, I know. I agree. And, do these ads actually make a difference? You said 50 million. I hadn't even heard that. There must make some difference. And Bolduc, as we reported earlier, was a very close race. So it only took influence of a couple thousand people possibly to make the difference there, right? So Mastriano, wasn't that also a pretty close race? I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah. So it's there. I don't know. Have they actually done what do you call it? Ads for Walker? Did they actually support him?
I think they gave up on him. I really think they did.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, he was going to win it anyway because there just wasn't anybody else there. But I think they thought he was a strong candidate, and everybody thinks that he is a strong candidate just because he's a sports hero. But because if he wasn't a sports hero, he wouldn't be even close. There have been some polls that showed it closer. But then there was a QPAC poll today that has Warner ahead by 6 points. So I think that the Emerson College poll, I believe, that showed Warner with 3 points over was an outlier. I think Emerson College has been their polls have been trending conservative this year for whatever reason. They're a good polling outfit, but they tend to sometimes the methodologies that are taken in a given election just don't work for it. For instance, have any of the pollsters been able to account for the Dobbs effect? They couldn't account for the Trump effect in 2016 or 2020. They tried and they still couldn't. Are they picking up on the Dobbs effect? Well, so far, in all of the elections, special elections, they haven't. So the point is that, are these things making it a lot of money? It's hard to say that it has no effect. And of course, the Democrats are kind of sly. These groups are kind of sly in how they do their ads. They're attacking them, but they're doing it in a way that if any Trumper sees them, it's like, hey, I like that person, right? It's just so it's a dual. It's a dual purpose to hurt them in the general, but help them in the primary. And I have to say, I saw a couple of the ads, and they're pretty good. Effective that way. Are they? But it also gives the Republicans a chance to say, "Well, gosh, you're so big on this that you have this January 6th committee, all the stuff. You're taking all very seriously, and then you're going to support those candidates, and they're all going to undermine the faith in the election system because they're all going to scream fraud in November when they lose."
And so I think you triggered it, and you reminded me, made me remember a point that I heard recently, which it should be obvious, but it's worth mentioning, and that you've got President Biden out there giving that speech recently where he talks about one of the biggest threats to the country is the threat to democracy itself, and that it is the people that deny the peaceful transfer of power, and that we have to if you're elevating it to an existential threat with Marines and flags and mood lighting in front of Independence Hall, and you're calling the entire country prime time to pay attention to, we have to deal with Trump and people who are denying elections. Then the Democratic Party, I'm not saying that the president endorsed this, but his party went out and started funding tens of millions of dollars for these very same candidates. It's if not hypocritical, it's at least cynical. And it takes away from some of the dignity, I think, or the persuasiveness of that argument to say, well, these are the strangest, these are some of the biggest harms we have to our country, but here's $3 million for the person who showed up at the Capitol and was actually there and is proud of it, and he may end up, being the next senator from Pennsylvania, for example.
Yeah, that's right. And again, even if he's not the senator or the governor from Pennsylvania, he's going to go back. Now he is now elevated to
governor.
a leader.
That's right. That's right.
Right. But he's now elevated to a leader.
Yeah.
He is a Republican Party leader. He won a primary. He is now, and yeah, it'll be a problem for the Republicans for a long time, but he's going to go find some other office to get elected to.
Yeah.
Because he got quite a few votes. All of them are. And this is just, and I can see it, though. On the other hand, had Morris won, Hassan's reelection, would have been more problematic, would have been tougher. There, you're looking at elections where there are decent Republican candidates, and they have a chance. Colorado's a little bit closer than it ought to be because the Republican is actually pretty decent. I might even think of voting for him if it wasn't, the stakes weren't so high. If I was there, I mean, I like him better than some Democrats, right? But the stakes are too high right now. If the Democrats are going to lose the House, then Democrats really need to have the Senate so they can at least get the judges through for the next 2 years, because McConnell will stop it. Sure, he will.
And so there's one other thing. Speaking of sort of the leadership and the power of the leadership of the Republicans, the senatorial election committee that was run, chaired by Rick Scott in Florida. It took a lot of heat. Number one, because of the program that he put forward, which was saying everybody in the whole country should pay their fair share of taxes, which would have raised taxes on the 30 or plus % of Americans who don't pay any federal income tax right now. So he was thinking about undermining Medicare and Medicaid's and solvency, et cetera. He had a whole grip of things that he proposed that the Republicans were like, what are you doing? We just need to let this, pendulum swing away from Democrats towards us. So not only did he make that gaffe early in the process, now it's coming out. There's all kinds of blame going around about the money that was wasted that committee had raised. So they had about $180 million available just to target Senate races. And it turns out that some huge percent, they have only close to, last I heard last week, it was about 25 million left. So they spent close to $160 million, and much of it, huge percentages of it, went to consultants and digital advertising. That was fundraising, trying to drum up small donors, and that was deemed to be not successful. They didn't encourage the base. There was no like Bernie Sanders groundswell of small donors. So in a sense, they were fishing and ended up wasting some of their powder. So you combine a lot of these things, and they didn't do themselves any favors.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is the Republicans are complaining Trump has got all these people in there, but he's not donating the money. He's got all this cash, and he's not putting it out to support these candidates, at least not in the numbers that they want. Republicans are asking him to pony up. With all this money in it, again, this is a question I keep asking. What do they even spend it on anymore? It used to be television advertisements that could make the huge difference, but fewer and fewer people watch television, and online ads are cheap, right? By comparison, I mean, you still got to produce them and everything like that, but airtime is not. It's not. There is no airtime. It's not. They do it by volume more than anything else. So what do you spend it on? Okay, well, your candidate can get around more. It can open up more committees and be grassroots if they know how to do it. But that's a lost art. Elections haven't been done that way, other than by some candidates like Bernie Sanders that does this. So. I don't know. Anyway, a little bit off topic there, but again, this strategy, we're going to be talking about it in the future because it's going to change the whole tenor of the election and politics for years to come.
One of the worst, most damaging decisions in modern history.
We could pass a law to protect every woman's right to an abortion, and we should do that.
If this turns out to be the opinion of the court and it's issued, it could have a major impact on the outcome of this election.
Whoever committed this lawless act knew exactly what it could bring about.
Whoever did this leak should be prosecuted and should go to jail for a very long time. This has shaken the independence and the ability of the judiciary to function.
If the rationale of the decision as released were to be sustained, a whole range of rights are in question.
All right, our last section, Senator Lindsey Graham. Very interesting character, has become elevated as kind of the second most influential senator after McConnell, maybe. I mean, he's in the headlines all the time. He's the one that threw a fit during the Kavanaugh hearings, probably single-handedly responsible for having, blunting the opposition to Kavanaugh, because he screamed and none of the Democrats took him on for it. But he's also the one who said famously, when they blocked Merrick Garland's nomination, if anything happens to in a election year, use it against me, right? And of course, he went right along with McConnell's plan to install Amy Coney Barrett days before the election. And of course, he tried to distinguish and said, well, because I was still mad because of the way they treated Kavanaugh, and so that justifies it. So you got this guy who has been caught in lies. But he's going to continue to be reelected in South Carolina. They hope, the Democrats hoped that they might have been able to take him out, but it wasn't that close. But he's in a little bit of trouble these days. After saying he hated Trump pretty much, and then he got his nose into the Georgia thing, getting a little bit ahead of himself, and now he's got to go do a grand jury testimony, trying like hell to get out of it. But every judges one after another saying, nope, you got to go testify. Oh, we'll limit it a little bit. You got some privilege as a senator, but you're going to have to go down there and testify. And so with that, he's become a little bit critical of Trump on some points, for instance, in the election denial. And I'm forgetting what the other controversy was recently, but he was critical of Trump on that. But yet he is doubling down. You want to talk a little bit about Dave?
Yeah. So just one of the things that you mentioned, I don't know if people are fully aware of it, but he was one of the people that ran for president, right? And when there was over a dozen Republicans running for president against Trump, and sort of one by one, they weren't Trumpy enough, I guess, and they kind of had to drop out. But he's one of the people that famously said, I'm off this train. Like this is just a little too crazy for me. The fact that we're gonna have someone like this be our candidate, and nope. But then, fast forward, he was one of Trump's biggest defenders, and his agenda's biggest defenders. So that tells us a little bit about how he reads the tea leaves and doesn't really mind being, again, either hypocritical or cynical, depending on how you look at it.
Because his voters let him get away with it.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's the truth of it. So there's two things I think that are relatively important here currently. One is, I think we'll take the easier one first, which is his role, chronologically, we'll take the earlier one first. His role in the Georgia calls to try to have the election overturned. So there's transcripts, there's witnesses, there are all sorts of folks who already, involved in that legal case that are going to, try to pin him down. Who did you talk to? Who did you coordinate with? What was your intentions? It's not like they said, hey, we need your support. It was a little bit more persuasive and a little bit more, shall we say, suspiciously corrupting, trying to corrupt the influence of the election. So that as that plays out, he's got a front row seat, possibly the hand on the tiller even. To mix a metaphor between a car and a boat, but he's right there with some culpability for interfering in a process, in an electoral process, a government proceeding, and that is arguably criminal. Not that they're actually going to try to find him criminally liable, but I think that they're going to want his testimony when they do when the January 6th committee dials in people for extensive targeting, they will probably leverage Lindsey Graham's testimony. So that's the first one. I'll let you comment on that.
Well, no, that's true. There's a couple of other things too that he's been controversial on. First of all, within the past couple of weeks, he said that that Lindsey Graham, said that if we prosecute Trump, there'll be riots in the streets.
Right,
So
right.
don't do. I mean, he goes on and on with this stuff. But I mean, I don't want to lose track of time here, because the biggest thing is
Right.
he obviously did not consult with McConnell. Because here the Republicans are looking at abortion as one of the big issues, and on the day where Republicans wanted to be able to attack Biden on the fact that inflation isn't dropping very quickly, he comes out with the proposed national abortion ban, and the other Republicans are saying we don't want any part of that. But here he is handing the Democrats a gift, not only by changing the story for that day, but now there's going to be all kinds of fundraising and campaigning against that.
Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier, like this is one of the key issues across all levels of the election. So people are actually voting at the local, state, and federal level, thinking that there's that this court, this Dobbs decision, has revoked and undermined decades of civil rights that half the population directly is acutely aware of, and then the other half, as their partners in human sexuality and family building and just life in general, it really affects every single person. And so the question is, how many people really do want the federal government to decide to ban abortion at the national level? There are very few people with that interest. So he really was not being calculating in any way, and he really did alienate many within his own party, not to mention independents and Democrats.
Yeah, and the mistake there is the Republican line has been, oh, we didn't overturn women's rights. We just brought it to the states. This is about states' rights. The states can decide. Well, a national ban means states don't get to decide if it's upheld. What I wanted to point out where he kind of veered from Trump is he also made a statement that about the offers of pardons. And he came out and said this was an absolute, wrong for Trump to do this. So here he's pissing off Trump, but I don't know that Trump even responded to that. Trump is kind of busy these days, and maybe he was grateful for the riot. I don't know, but why do you think he did this? Because the Republicans are probably really angry with him right now over that. They had a line that they could push, but the states' rights line goes out the window with this. They don't, because anytime they bring it up in the debates now, they're going the Democratic candidate for Senate or for whatever is going to say, but your own Senator Lindsey Graham says he wants a national ban. So where are you guys? That's going to put that candidate in a very tough spot.
I think the timing and the focus is a fatal error. It's going to really hurt their party in a big way for a variety of reasons, like the stuff that I've already said about it just not being fully supported. But I think the intention, I think the motivation was to kind of, change the script, so to speak, because the direction, the momentum was going in the wrong way, and maybe his team just could not stop him from stepping on the inflation news, which could have been catastrophic, as you can see, or at least temporarily impairing Democrats' momentum.
Yeah.
Not catastrophic, but temporarily.
I don't think it was catastrophic. In fact, people are paying less in gas. I think that trumps anything that is in terms of, on paper, it's 8.3%. But the fact of the matter is a lot of people are paying less in gas, and they notice that more than the prices in food and used in new cars, which, the core industries. Other things have dropped more significantly, but the core inflation index, food and energy. Energy's gone up, but gasoline has gone down.
Yeah.
And this also shows us that maybe oil isn't quite as fundamentally to the economy, but that's a topic for another show.
Yeah.
But the timing was that the Republicans wanted to go out and charge and hit on this and try to make more of an issue on it. Instead, they're put on the defense thanks to one of their own.
So your question to me was like, what would inspire somebody to do this now? And I think that this is just a case of just a little bit of overreach in looking at the data and looking at the international norms. Because what I heard them say, what I heard some of the Republicans saying was, look, in the United States, if we did put this in place, it would align us with most of the other countries that ban abortion after the first trimester. So it's not that they're globalist ever in their values or policy recommendations, but it's one sort of argument in favor of, well, we're not that far out of the global mainstream if we did this. But also just when you start like looking at the crosstabs of the polling data on abortion, a lot of folks think we ought not be doing that partial birth abortion technique in the final. I think it's about 50,000 people a year get abortions in that last trimester. So it's not a major catastrophic national high priority, but I think that the Republicans, or at least Lindsey Graham and his people, saw this as a way to say, look, most people believe that we ought to limit it to X date, and that we ought to take into account there are half the states out there that are apparently implementing pro-life legislation that are basically describing personhood.
Yeah, it's not a very extreme proposal, but it is a national ban on some abortions. Right. And it counters their whole line of, well, we're going to leave it up to the states. Right. That's what the Dobbs decision is. It turns it over to the states, and there's a certain appeal to that, but this undercuts that.
I mean, if you're going to make the case that it's murder, and they are moving in some I would say right conservative folks are starting to say we ought to not just punish the abortion provider, we also ought to punish the person seeking it out. So there are far more extreme views out there in the periphery, and I think that I'm projecting here, but I think that they thought that they had enough of a they checked enough of the boxes here with respect to their supporters. It's a team building exercise. There was zero chance of this getting a floor vote from Schumer. No, so there was it was a self-inflicted wound.
No, and McConnell threw water on it right away.
Yeah,
immediately.
But just we'll talk. I'll mention this in my prediction. But there are other people out there who supported this that are Senate Republicans. It wasn't just him going rogue. I think that there was enough interest groups out there and colleagues that said we ought to stand up for our values. And despite the win at all costs mentality that might have benefited from more reflection and planning and strategic consideration.
He didn't talk to McConnell about it. That's the thing. That is, they're usually pretty good about staying in line, but I think he doesn't like to see himself as somebody who's like McConnell's lackey. He wants his own identity. He probably thought that he could frame the discussion differently. He's getting into himself a little bit, and maybe also take some heat off him for what he's going to have to say in the grand jury testimony too. He's looking, he's looking for excuses like that, but he has everybody angry with him except maybe the Democratic strategists. It's that because and the timing of it was perfect. It was like 2 hours later, I think.
Yeah.
Before most people even had the inflation news, and it's just because Biden was going to be put in the tough spot of having to explain it again. It's like people are either feeling it or they're not. I think most people are, and I also think that there are a lot more sophisticated voters now that understand that inflation isn't necessarily something the president can control, especially when there's global inflation. So, is that going to affect the centrists anyways? It's it'll galvanize the Republican base, but will centrists go for it? Traditionally, they do turn on a president over inflation, but I'm not. There are a lot of traditional things that aren't true anymore. And there's been a lot of discussion in the media about how there isn't control, about the war in Ukraine and all of these different things. So he probably felt like he was reframing it, and maybe he planned to do it. anyway, and didn't think in terms of the inflation report. Maybe it was just when he planned to do it the night before the last primary to kind of do this, and maybe he was under a lot of pressure from people who have supported him to do this. He's in South Carolina, after all. That's probably one of the reddest states in the nation, in a lot of ways. So it just anyway, I'll let you close out.
Yeah, I mean, another piece of this is just that there's only 8 weeks left, and the theater concept of Deus ex machina, the God out of the machine, that something's going on the stage, the protagonist has got this situation going on, but then like from the sky they lower this intervention. And so with 8 weeks to go, really part of the I guess, for lack of a better word, agenda setting potential is, what are we going to be talking about? And Biden, like I said, I think, and Democrats in general had some degree of momentum. And with only 8 weeks to go, you spend a week talking about Graham's abortion bill. That's 1/8 of the agenda checked off the list.
Yeah, no, and they're gonna fundraise on that. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So, what do you think the future is? So I'll let you close out, but of Senator Graham, he's not going to be elected president. He's just not of that character. Does he have in mind becoming the majority leader once McConnell is gone? Because McConnell's starting to get up there in age. What do you think his ultimate goals are?
I mean, I wish it weren't true, because I have seen him in a favorable light many years ago, and that's been dimming, almost like Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Back in the day, we all had some, I'm from the Northeast, so many people I know had favorable views of him for a variety of reasons. Not anymore. And so I think Lindsey Graham's sort of fallen down that rabbit hole where he's, been a little overly zealous in his support of President Trump, and now he's kind of stuck on that chute, and he's going out the barn with Trump down towards infamy, and it's unfortunate, but I think that's where he's headed.
I think it is too. I mean, and he's not making anybody happy. I think he's pretty much sunk his chances of becoming majority leader. But
yeah, I think so too.
All right. Well, that brings us to our final segment, predictions. Dave, what do you got for us?
Yeah, so following up on some of the things we discussed already, Senator Marco Rubio is defending his seat against Val Demings in Florida. According to Real Clear Politics, he's currently that gap is now just down to 2 or 3%, which is margin of error.
That's crazy.
As recently as August, he had a double-digit lead. And since the incumbents typically have over a 90% reelection rate, this indicates he's not in a good place. His most recent decision to co-sponsor Lindsey Graham's federal abortion ban bill, I think, might provide the additional reason that people on the fence might need to replace him. So I predict the Florida Senate race will be an upset. Val Demings will win in a nail-biter.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Now, Val Demings is an impressive candidate, so that's the other thing. All right, my prediction is going to be with regard to this threatened strike. The Democrats can't let this happen. They are going to put something forward, whether it's an agreement, capitulation, quote unquote, to the unions or whatever. They're going to put an end to this, and I don't think the Republicans, even though they're balking at it because they would like to see this happen, I really do think some of them are nihilists that way, even though it would cause immense pain across the board. They're not going to do it, because if there is something up for discussion and they filibuster it, then the Democrats easily turn it on them. They say, we would have been out of this. The economy was doing great and they killed it, and they'll have the case to do that. So I do believe that the strike is not going to happen. I believe that they will work this out, and there might be initially an executive order or something, but I believe the strike is not going to happen because the Democrats are not going to let it happen. Well, that takes us to the end of the show. We will be back next week to discuss these. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. But in the meantime, stay informed and stay engaged.